Hello, and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Sandy Matz, and I'm a member of the Book Fair Steering Committee, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on this Wednesday morning to Mitten Moments Volume 2 with Donald Levin. We're celebrating 70 years of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair with an entire year of book and story programming. Join us as we honor the world's first Jewish book fair, highlighting diverse authors, curating new Jewish writing, and promoting the global art of Jewish storytelling. To see our full event schedule, watch events you may have missed, and find our online store where you can find In the House of Night, written by today's author, and plenty of other hand-selected books and gifts. Visit our website at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. If you enjoy this event, and I'm sure you will, and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to Book Fair. You can do either or both at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. We rely on our community support to make this annual event possible. So thank you in advance for becoming part of the family. The Book Fair team would like to thank the Commerce Township Public Library for their support. I also want to extend our deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair committee. Your dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work have made all of this possible. We have a delightful event for you this morning, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below or by texting the phone number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they will take as many of your questions as they can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting events. The focus of today's event is the novel, In the House of Night. We have with us the author of the book, Donald Levin, as well as Karen Tintori, who will moderate the discussion. When the police investigation into the murder of a gentle retired history professor stalls, friends of the dead man plead with the PI, Martin Preuss, to find out what happened. The twisting trail leads him across metropolitan Detroit into a treacherous world of long-buried family secrets, where the anguished relations between parents and children clash with the gathering storm of white supremacist terrorism. An award-winning fiction writer and poet, Donald Levin is the author of 7 Martin Preuss mysteries set in his hometown of Ferndale, Michigan. He has authored other fiction and poetry books that have appeared in many print and e-journals. Mr. Levin is the retired Dean of Faculty and Professor of English at the former Marygrove College in Detroit. Karen Tintori is a prolific author of fiction and nonfiction books, active in the Detroit Jewish community and Italian genealogy. Please join me in welcoming Donald Levin and Karen Tintori.
Good morning. Thank you, Sandy. Good morning, Donald. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you.
Likewise.
I just finished in a blitz read through the last 200 pages of Savage City, and wow. I hope we get to talk about that too. But
Sure.
Tell us about the Martin Preuss series, and this is In the House of the Night, with the glare of there you go, without the glare. And this is the latest. It's just coming out.
It came out in 2020.
It came out in 2020.
Yes.
Do you have something new coming? Savage City is the new one coming out?
Savage City is brand new. Yeah.
Okay. So this is part of a series. Do you need to start at the beginning, or can somebody pick this up and start and then go back?
No, I wrote each one as a standalone book so that you can pick it up anytime, any place in the series. A lot of people like to start at the beginning just because they like to start at the beginning and have the sense of how the characters develop. The characters are the same, but the mystery and the suspense and the secrets in each one of the books are different. So anybody can pick it up at any point. I wrote them specifically so that you didn't need to read them in order, and so that there wouldn't be a cliffhanger at the end so that you'd have to wait until the other one, which I hate when that happens.
Like
So
series TV.
That's right. They're all individually packaged, sort of.
And tell us about Martin and how you came up with the character and what inspired you to write a detective novel.
I've been a fan of detective novels and mysteries pretty much all my life. When I was a little boy, I used to write scripts for Dragnet, if you remember Dragnet.
Oh, yeah.
On TV. One of the scripts I wrote, I remember, is about a jewel robbery, and the detective finds the jewel thief because the jewel thief drops jewels on the ground. So he chases the detective that way. I hope I've gotten a little more sophisticated since then. But so I've always been a fan of mysteries and detective stories. Not so much for the puzzle, but for the portrait of the characters under the stress of crime. Henning Mankell, who's one of my favorite authors, who was one of my influences for the Martin Preuss series, has a detective called Kurt Wallander, which people may have heard of. There's a TV series with Kenneth Branagh called Wallander. And he said, Mankell said that he doesn't so much write police procedurals as he writes about society as seen through the lens of crime. And that really resonated with me because I thought that was pretty much exactly what I would like to do. So I think of my books not just as mysteries, although they do have mysteries and they do have puzzles that have to be solved, but I think of them as portraits of characters in society under the stress of crime. The main character is Martin Preuss, who starts out as a police detective on a fictionalized Ferndale police force in the first three books. And then in the last three books, he retires from the police department and becomes a private investigator. The last four books, actually. He has a son whose name is Toby, who is profoundly multiply handicapped. And Toby winds up being one of everybody's favorite characters when they read the series. Toby keeps his father grounded. He lives in a group home because his father is a widower and can't take care of all of Toby's needs by himself with his crazy schedule as a policeman and as a private detective. So Toby lives in a group home, and Martin visits him every morning, every evening, comes and says good night to him, says good morning to him. Toby is based almost entirely on my grandson, whose name was Jamie. And the relationship between Toby and Martin really sort of mirror the relationship not only that I have with him and that my wife has had with Jamie, but also with our daughter Lisa's relationship with Jamie. Lisa was Jamie's mother, and she's very devoted to him, as Martin Preuss is devoted to Toby. So there's this great love between Martin Preuss and Toby that really comes through in the books. And as I said, it's Toby being profoundly handicapped. He can't speak, he can't sit up, he can't take care of his daily needs by himself. But he teaches Martin how to be a good man, I guess is the best way to say that. He teaches Martin what's important in life. And what's important in life is not how much money you make or what kind of job you have or what your job title is or how much power you have, but just that kind of, how patient you are and how compassionate you are with everyone around you. And Martin tries to learn that from Toby. So at the center of these books is the relationship between Martin and Toby. And as I said, each one of the books has its own mystery, has its own crime. And the crimes are based on really things I hear, things that people tell me, stories I read in the newspaper, family lore, things like that. There's, Henry James said, if you want to be a novelist, you have to be someone upon whom nothing is lost. And that's sort of how I feel is the case. You have to be open constantly to stories. For example, In the House of Night came about really as a result of the Charlottesville, Virginia white supremacist rally in 2017. I found that extremely disturbing, as almost everybody did. Not everybody, unfortunately. But I wanted to do something about that, and I wanted to portray it fictionally. I wanted to show the extent to which that is infecting our society, particularly in Michigan. Michigan has a long history of white supremacist activity, which is in part what Savage City is also about. But we'll talk about that in a bit later. So I wanted to deal with the threat of white supremacists, and I wanted to deal with it in a way that that Martin Preuss would be able to be involved with and handle. So that's where that came about. And what I typically do when unless I have the story already in mind, which I didn't for In the House of Night, what I do is brainstorm ideas, look in newspapers, start with characters, because these are very character-driven books, and then work from there. I don't usually outline the books first, although I did with Savage City because it's such a complicated book. But I started with a basic crime, and then sort of maneuvered everything around that. In this case, I found a newspaper article about a professor who had been killed in Ann Arbor, and that was sort of the germ of the idea for In the House of Night.
So you're a pantser. They're in writing, we call ourselves plotters and pantsers.
Yes.
I'm a plotter. I have to know the beginning, the middle, and the end. And sometimes, you go off on little scenic routes, and the book in your head is not always the book on the page.
Sure.
So you come up with a germ of an idea and you just go.
For the mystery novels, that's essentially what I did. I have the sort of either the germ of the idea or a very, very basic arc of the story that I want to talk about, or sometimes it's just I start with an anecdote. To give you another example, I have a book called I'll start with the first book, Crimes of Love. I was driving in rural Buffalo or suburban Buffalo, actually, which is where my daughter and her family live. And I was passing a deer crossing sign in a dark, sort of deserted highway. And as you sometimes see in these deer crossing signs, there is bullet holes in the metal. And in the instant that I passed the sign, I looked past it and saw there was a house in the distance. And in that house, there was a light on in the top floor. And I happened to think, what would happen if somebody shot at that deer crossing sign, missed, and the bullet went on into the house? It would be a disaster, and if somebody had been standing at the window. So that was the germ of Crimes of Love. That's not exactly what happened in Crimes of Love, but that's how these things start, with an idea. Another one of the books, my other grandson Alex was talking about an incident that occurred at a daycare center for handicapped individuals that he worked at, where a bus left off one of the drivers, or one of the passengers, I mean, who was handicapped, and the bus disappeared. And the handicapped, of course, that was a catastrophe in itself. The handicapped passenger subsequently wound up discovered in a church where the driver had left him, and the driver, it turns out, had sold the bus for drugs. So that became another one of the novels. It starts with a little, a little story, a little idea, a little arc, and then I sit down and develop it around characters. So I wound up bringing in other things that I hear, other things I see, other things I've read, and sort of braid a story out of all that. But go ahead.
But I was going to ask you, how do you develop the characters? Do you do a whole backstory for them? How much research do you go into that the reader never sees? Or do you do, I mean, I've gone to stores and say, so-and-so would wear this, they wouldn't wear that, to try to get a better idea of the character. Right. How do you develop your characters?
I start out with the physical description of the character, sort of like an actor. You start out with, what does the character look like? What does the character dress like? And then I go inside. A lot of times I'll look for a model in real life, not necessarily anybody I know, but somebody I might see in the street. And then I'll brainstorm the background, and I'll say, what would somebody who looks like this, where would they come from? Somebody who dresses like that, where would they come from? And I'll build the whole character around that. So I will brainstorm that. And that's essentially what I did in The House at Night. I took this the sort of shell of the history professor. I knew I wanted to make him a history professor because I wanted to have that connection with the history of white supremacy in Michigan. And then I gave him a place to live around the corner from where I live in Ferndale. And I started to think, okay, what would he look like if he's retired? What kind of history would he have? And it turns out that he wound up being a peace activist. And we had gone downtown. My wife and I had gone downtown to the Sword into Plowshares group, where my wife, who's an artist, had an exhibit, and he wound up being involved with that. So all of these things sort of because the characters become magnetized, and they pull in characteristics, and they pull in things that they're involved with. And as I was brainstorming this,
we have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Continue.
And as I was thinking about this character, it turns out that he was a Buddhist. So I did research into the Buddhist temples around town. Now, for Savage City, I did a lot of research because that meant going back to 1930. But the Preuss series itself is contemporary. So the research that I do for that is a lot of times it's going to places, seeing what they look like, getting a feel for them. I'm not heavy on description, so I don't spend a lot of time describing what places are or what people look like. Nobody knows what Preuss looks like. So you can sort of, put your own image onto him.
That is a wonderful thing, that when writers do that, they engage the audience, they engage the reader, and the reader becomes part of the story and becomes more invested in the story. And likewise, when you were talking about Toby, yesterday by chance, I happened to see a plug for Masterclass with Neil Gaiman, and he said, if you put one true thing in the beginning of your story that the reader can latch onto and realize that is true and know and trust you, then you can take them on whatever journey you want, and you will have credibility along the way.
Yeah.
We have a question from Naomi Levine. She said, I'm intrigued that you wrote screenplays for Dragnet. Is it much more difficult to write an episode that needs to be complete in a finite period of time rather than a novel?
Well, I didn't write screenplays for Dragnet. I wrote a script for Dragnet when I was a little boy, just as a way of sort of engaging myself in the Dragnet world, in the mystery world. So I wasn't really a script writer for Dragnet. I did write scripts when I grew up and became a professional writer. I did write scripts for video programs and produced video programs, but an actual script writer, I unfortunately was not.
When did you start writing? I mean, you started when you were a little boy doing this Dragnet. Was that the first piece, or had you already, aside from writing for school assignments, did you have a love for writing from a young age, or when did you really get into it?
I always had a love for writing, and I always made up stories. I remember my father brought home an old typewriter from his office when I was, 8 or so, and I started to play with that. And I thought, like a musician, I thought, I found my instrument. This is what I want to do. And someone, when I was young, gave me a little printing press in a prescient sort of gift that I played with. So I've always been a writer. There was a time, in fact, I became a professional writer, writing speeches and grants and video programs and things like that. But I always wanted to be a novelist because when I grew up, that's what I thought. That's who I thought did the heavy lifting, of literature, the novelists. Saul Bellow and Malamud and Philip Roth. I mean, those were the real, I thought, and Tolstoy. I wanted to be Tolstoy, So that's where I thought the real good stuff was being done. Not to diminish poetry, because I wrote a lot of poetry as an adult, but when I grew up, I wanted to write fiction. And I did what everybody does, you write stories and you send them out and you get them back, and you write stories and you send them out and you get them back. And every once in a while, something gets placed and it becomes a wonderful thing. At one point in the, I think it was the 80s, the early 80s, I had a novel manuscript that I was sending around for representation. I was trying to find an agent. And you send it around, you know yourself, you send it around, you get it back, you send it around, you get it back. And finally I got a hit from a New York agent, the guy who sold The Towering Inferno to the movies, said he liked the book and he wanted to represent me. And I thought, all right, I'm in. This is my foot in the door. But not so fast. He sent it around and he got it back, and he sent it around and he got it back. And finally, after a couple of years of that, he said, I can't do anything more with this. I like it. I believe in the book, but I just can't sell it. And in the meantime, I had written another novel, which I had sent him, and he sent that back to me. And he said, if I can't sell the first one, I don't think I'm going to be able to sell this one. So that put me into a funk for a long time.
I can believe it.
I thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't. The little bit of encouragement that you get from placing stories is not worth all of the tons of rejection that you get. So I thought, and this was I was in my 30s. I was in my early 30s, and I said, can't do this anymore. I'm obviously not set up for this. I'm not meant to be a novelist. So I was writing for a living at that time. I was doing public relations writing. And advertising writing, and I said, I'm just going to concentrate on this because I'm not a fiction writer. So I left fiction and I didn't write for 10 years.
Wow.
And I kept reading, of course, but I didn't do imaginative writing for 10 years. And finally, we moved to New York City, where my wife got a job at Long Island University, and I got a job at the New York City Department of Health as the speechwriter for the commissioner. And as I was writing things for him, I was writing op-ed pieces for him that appeared in the New York Times, and I was writing op-ed pieces for him that appeared in the Journal of the Medical Association, and I was writing pieces for Ed Koch, as he was the mayor at the time. And I started to think, everybody's getting rich and famous on my dime, and the pressure started to build to write again, to write imaginatively again, my own stuff. And finally, it built, and when I started to have fantasies of pushing people off of the subway track, I thought I got to do something here. So I started a novel. I without knowing what I was going to do with it, I started another novel, and that really got me back into writing fiction. And I started to see started to remember the pleasure of writing, and the pleasure of writing a long form of creative writing. And so I haven't really stopped since then.
Where does the teaching gig come in?
Good question. When we moved from New York City, our grandson Jamie had been born, and as I mentioned, Jamie had lots of serious problems, and I was so close to him that I thought, I'm going to change the whole direction of my life, and I'm going to be a special ed teacher, and I'm going to work with kids like Jamie. So we moved up to Buffalo, which is where Lisa and Jamie and the rest of the family lived. Although Sue got a job in Pittsburgh, so she did what she called the Buffalo Erie Triangle, going back and forth, the Pittsburgh Buffalo Erie Triangle, going back and forth to Buffalo from Pittsburgh. So I took some special ed classes with the intention of being a teacher, and I thought, I love this population, but this is not really for me. I needed more intellectual stimulation than I knew I was going to get from being a special ed teacher. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I have a broad experience as a writer. I had been a writer for about 20 years at this point, of grants and speeches and op-ed pieces and annual reports and things like that. And I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach this. I'm going to teach what I know about writing. I'm going to be a writing teacher. And I realized in order to do that, I had to have a degree. I had a master's, but I knew I was going to need a PhD. So in Buffalo, I went back to school at the University of Buffalo to get a PhD with a specialist in teaching writing. And we were from Detroit, my wife and I. And as it happened, there was an opening at this little place called Marygrove College, which I knew about because when I lived near Marygrove in Northwest Detroit, and also I was the house manager for the theater at Marygrove.
Interesting.
Yeah, so because I used to be a theater manager too, and another one of my former lives. So I got the job at Marygrove. They happened to be looking for somebody at the exact time that I happened to be looking for a job, and I knew of them, and I knew some of the people who worked there. So that's how that started. And I thought, well, I'll just teach for a couple of years. Marygrove is a little place, it's not really my background, but I'll teach here for a couple of years and get some experience, and then I'll move someplace else. And as these things happen, I wound up staying for 20 years. And to keep myself busy and to keep myself occupied, I did different things. I started a literary magazine. I started an honors program. So I enjoyed my time there. And one of my friends in the English department where I taught said something actually that kept me there. He said, the students at Marygrove deserve the best teachers. They don't deserve somebody who can't get a job someplace else. They deserve somebody who is the best at what they do. And I wanted to be the best at what I did. So I decided I would stay. And I actually had a very happy and successful career there.
And did you teach literature, creative writing, a little bit of everything?
A little bit of everything. Yep. I started out as the writing person and taught writing classes. And then gradually I taught a lit class here, and then I taught a creative writing class here, and I taught a graduate class. And so, gradually became a generalist in teaching a lot of different things, writing and literature.
Well, I'm sure you have heard, as I have heard, I have a story for you that you could write as your next novel. And
Great.
everybody seems to have a story. And what I usually tell them is, well, if you write 1 page a day, double space, by the end of the year, you'll have the first draft of your story. What advice did you give to future novelists when you were teaching them? What might people out there who want to write a book take away from this conversation?
Well, the first thing you have to do is read. You have to
Absolutely.
read everything you can get your hands on. You can't be a writer without reading everything you can get your hands on, any more than you can be a musician or compose music without listening to music and knowing what has been written. So you have to read. That's really the first thing. And you have to burn to do it. If people would ask me, do you think I should? Students would ask me, do you think I should be a writer? I'd always say no. Unless you burn to do it, then find something else to do. And if you really are a writer, if you really want to be a writer, then what I tell you isn't going to make a difference. So do what's in your heart. So read and write. I mean, those are the two areas. Read everything you can, write everything you can, and I guess the other thing would be to the common wisdom is to write what you know. And I always tell students, or I always told students, throw that out the window. Don't write what you know, because you'll if you're interested in science fiction, if you're interested in writing about monsters on another planet, you don't know anything about that. So write what you know isn't good advice. Write what you read is really the best advice. What do you like to read? That's what you like to write. That's how I wound up writing detective novels. So I think those are really the key parts, and don't. The other thing I would say is, and it sounds funny to me, to my ears to say this, but don't quit. Know why you're writing, and don't write just for publication. The magic of writing is in the writing itself. Just like in the magic of art is in doing the work itself. The magic in writing, the pleasure in writing, is not in publishing and getting your name in print, but is actually doing the work itself. That's the thing that transports you, not getting published. So I guess those would be my key pieces of advice.
When you write, do you write a complete first draft, or do you go back and polish as you go? I've never done multiple drafts before. I've just polished what I did the day before and move on, and then later read it and go back and, change something, or there are little clues you can put in, or things, put in the beginning. And it's really hard for me to just keep going. So what is your game plan when you start writing a novel?
To keep going. That's the most important thing for me. I have a daily quota of 1,000 words, and all the work I did as a writer, as a professional writer, has stood me in very good stead in writing fiction, because I approach it as a job. When I was a speechwriter for the commissioner of the health department, and he would be waiting for me to finish a speech that he could go out. He had to catch a plane, say, to go to Washington to give a speech to a Senate subcommittee. I had to have that done. I couldn't say to him, Doc, I wasn't feeling it this time, so I don't have anything for you. You had to have it done, and I learned how to have it done. So I learned that you can't wait for inspiration, but the inspiration comes with the work itself. So I start at the beginning. There's a certain degree of messiness in the beginning of writing a novel, because you're feeling your way, you're finding out who are the characters, you're finding, what's the plot. I work a little bit ahead of where I am. I said I don't outline typically, but I outline, it's like driving a car in a snowstorm. You see a little bit ahead of yourself with the headlights, and that's how I keep working. And I'll go back and read what I did before. I'll always stop at a place where I know what's going to happen next. This is advice that Hemingway gave as a writer, and I found that to be extremely helpful. Always stop where you know what the next thing is going to happen in the book the next day, so that you don't have to sit and say, "Oh well, I wonder what I'm going to do now." So I always make a little note. Next, this is going to happen in the book. So I don't spend a lot of time polishing unless I make enormous changes that necessitate taking a character out or adding a character. But I go through it day by day until I have the draft, and then I work on the computer and I'll print out the draft, and then I'll go through it again and I'll rewrite it, because I find at the end of the first draft, that's when I really figure out what I wanted to do in the book. And people say that one of the things that strikes them about my books are how layered they seem to be. And I think that comes from doing successive drafts. I'll do a draft, then I'll print that out. I'll work on that. I'll print that out again. I'll work on that. And gradually I get to the point where I'm happy enough. Not that you're ever happy, I guess, but at a point where I'm happy enough to be able to say, okay, now it's time to show this to somebody. My wife is actually my first reader and my best reader, so she's the first one that I send it to.
My husband and my son are my first readers, and my son is a very astute editor.
Yeah,
and isn't it interesting? This is advice even for those of you who are just writing letters. When you write something, you see it on the screen. It's a whole lot different than when you print it out and look at it in hard copy.
Exactly.
You notice it's amazing what you don't notice on the screen.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's a completely different thing. So, and then I usually go through 4 or 5 full drafts, full revisions. Not only, revision for me is really, revision means re-seeing. So that's what I do when I sit down with the next version of the draft. I try and re-see it. So I'm not just correcting grammar or correcting typos or doing stuff like that. I'm standing back from it and taking a look at it and saying, how does this book work? And one of the things that I love about writing is that, and especially about writing a long piece of fiction, is that the work unfolds to me. That's why when I understand why people say I plotted out. But I can't do that, because the book itself, it's like a flower. It unfolds to me as I'm writing it, and that to me is the fun part.
Yeah, I think writers' brains work differently in that regard too.
Yeah.
Have you ever written yourself into a corner, and how did you figure out how to get out of it?
When I was little, I went to see the movie El Cid. I don't know if you remember, but it's about the Spanish hero El Cid with Charlton Heston, and Sophia Loren, I think, was in it too. But I was inspired to write a medieval knights story from that, and I had my hero at a place. I think he was about to be hung, maybe, and I didn't know how to save him, so. Stopped. But usually it's when I'm at a place where, okay, I don't know what's going to happen, there's several things you can do. You can say what shouldn't happen, and have a list of things. What's the cliched thing to happen? What would be the usual thing to happen? And then you start to think about, well, if those things won't happen, what should happen? And how do I want the story? What direction do I want the story to go in at this point? So,
what's the worst thing that could happen?
What's the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's fun. I mean, it's it's a fun process. I hear people talk about how, oh, I hate to write. It's boring. It's a drag. It's excruciating, and I love it. I have to say I love to put words together, and I love to turn sentences around. And when I was really young, I wanted to be an architect until I realized that math was involved in architecture. But I feel like now I'm still an architect, except I'm building structures of
I was
language.
just going to say that. Actually, you are very interesting. So, about how long does it take you from coming up with the characters to saying, okay, this is ready to go?
The fastest it's been is in Savage City. I started in January of last year. I wrote the first little germ of an idea for Savage City, and I published it at the very end of this year. So that's really the fastest that I've done things, which is interesting to me because that's the most complicated book that I've done with there are 4 main characters, 5 if you count the city of Detroit, and there's a lot going on, and there are a lot of balls in the air, and there's this, so I was sort of surprised that, and it's a big book, as you can see. Yeah. But
Yeah.
the first book, usually I write them in a year. I've gotten it down to where In the House of Night, I wrote in a year. I write the draft in about 3 or 4 months, and then I spend the rest of the time revising.
That's about my speed also. I want to talk a little bit about Savage City before I even got to your endnotes, which I looked at midway through the book. I mean, Detroit was a major character.
Yeah.
I love what you did with Detroit in the book.
Thanks.
And my favorite character was Clarence. And I also write where I go from in different books. It's been from one time period to another time period, where each chapter, there'll be a couple chapters on one character or place and time, and then switches. And so I was very familiar with the way that you did that, because I do that. But I'd love to talk about that, because
Sure.
That was absolutely fascinating, the way you took 4 different people from 4 walks of life, and how you had them all converge at one incident, and how it affected all of them, or how it, how they came into it and how they came out of it. So, yeah,
that's exactly what I was trying to do. So you got it. You got it. Plus, Detroit is in the background as the 5th character. So I started out. I knew I wanted to have a book like that. Because I had been reading a lot of James Ellroy, who is the guy who wrote L.A. Confidential, which was made into a movie. And he's got a lot of several books, several long novels about Los Angeles in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And as I was reading one of his books, I thought to myself, I'd like to do something like this about Detroit. Because what he does is he brings in historical characters, he has fictional characters, he mixes them up together. And I thought I would like to do that. I would like to try that. I was looking for something to do after my last Preuss book. Because I don't know if I'm going to do Preuss again. I may, but I may not. But I needed a break from it. So I knew I wanted to have a book where at least 4 different people would interact. And I started to brainstorm, who should these people be? I want them to come from different walks of life. I want to be able to portray a real sense of what Detroit was like in the 30s. The book is set in 1932. So, I started to think, what's going on in 1932? Well, the Union activity is very strong then. There was in fact, the centerpiece of the book is the 1932 Ford Hunger March, which began as a march where workers were going to demand from Henry Ford certain rights, the right to relief, because this was the Depression. Don't forget, in 1932, and Detroit was very hard hit in the Depression. So, so that was going on. The Ford Hunger March happened, and it turned into really a massacre, because it turned into a police riot. The police, the Dearborn police, shot and killed 5 people. So I thought that might be something that sticks the book together, that I can hang the book on. And I started to think, well, who might be the other characters? And there was, you talked about Clarence. Clarence Brown is a police detective. He's a Black police detective, one of the few Black police detectives and the few Black policemen at the time in 1932 in the Detroit Police Department. And he's based on an actual character. There was an actual Black police detective at the time whose name was Henderson Turpin, who I based Clarence on. And in fact, you may remember as you read it, Clarence has this sort of armor that he wears, and that's actually what this actual policeman crafted for himself.
Wow.
But I changed the character. I significantly changed the character because I wanted him to be a certain way. So I crafted this character. I brainstormed, who is he? What would he come from? What would he look like? What would he do? What would his background be? How would he work as a Black policeman in the racist 1930s? So he was one of the people that I wanted to deal with, because there was a lot of police corruption going on at the time, a lot of police violence going on at the time, and I knew that I wanted that part to be in the book. We're talking about Detroit in the 1930s. You have to talk about the Purple Gang, right? So I wanted one character who wound up being a character called Ben Rubin to be a Purple Gang wannabe, not a member, but a wannabe. He was a young sort of young, Jewish street guy who took part in petty crimes, but his uncle was a member of the Purple Gang, and he wanted to be part of something. All the 4 main characters are really sort of they're isolated. They're isolated outcasts in one way or another. And Detroit in the 1930s was a very anti-Semitic town, with Henry Ford, whose anti-Semitism was legend, with Father Coughlin, whose anti-Semitism was legend. So there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Detroit, as I'm sure everybody who's watching this is aware. Not that it stopped, by the way, but it was particularly strong back then. So I wanted one of the characters to be a Jewish guy who wanted to connect with something. He was kind of lost. He was at loose ends. There was a lot of concern about communism in the 30s, and I wanted somebody who was engaged with the Communist Party at the time, who was a progressive activist, and I wanted a woman as part of this mix. So I came up with a character named Elizabeth Waters, who is in her 30s, and she works for WXYZ, which at the time was putting on the Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger was just in development in 1932. So I had her work on. I made her a creative assistant to the creative department, who wound up being a bunch of drunken guys who never got any work done. So I made up another radio series that she was working on. And she was a very smart woman. She was from Grosse Pointe. She came from that privileged background, but she was isolated because of her smartness, because of the lack of opportunities for women in 1932. And I also knew that I wanted to talk about the Black Legion. Now, not many people know about the Black Legion, but the Black Legion was an actual terrorist group, white supremacist terrorist group in 1930s in the Midwest and particularly in Michigan and Detroit. It's sort of an offshoot of the Ku Klux Klan, but they had black robes and a little sort of pirate hat that looked like a toy pirate hat. But these guys were rough characters, and they were responsible for killing. They were responsible for terrorism, and a lot of people don't know about them. I
had not heard of them until I read the book.
Yeah, a lot of people haven't, which is partly why I wanted to have this history about it. Everything in the book is as historically accurate as I could possibly get it. Did a lot of research for this book.
Is the one question I have, the meeting with Henry Ford and Father Coughlin, that little meeting, you made that up.
But it didn't.
I love that you slipped Coughlin in there.
Well, I had to put him in there somehow.
Yep.
And as it's really historical crime novel, and the crime that winds up, driving the second half of the book, emerges from that meeting that they have. But that's a fictional meeting.
Okay.
So anyway, I came up with I thought who would be involved in a Black Legion. So I came up with a character named Roscoe Grissom, who was an unemployed auto worker, a Southern transplant, as was Clarence, as part of the Great Migration, the Great White and Black Migration north in the 20s. And he winds up being sort of sucked into the Black Legion, and so these four characters intertwine. They don't know each other at the start of the book, but as the plots unfold, the characters get more and more closer and closer to each other, and finally they, as you pointed out, they wind up being they come together at the key part of the book, and that winds up changing them, and it changes the city, it changes everything.
Well, our time is starting to run short, and I know you wanted to read a little bit, and I don't know if you want to read something from both of the books to give a taste of each, or if you have a preference.
How about let me read a little bit from both.
Okay.
This is the beginning of In the House of Night. This is chapter 1. It's just it's just 2.5 pages, so it should go fast. This is how the book begins, how the plot kicks off. Brittany Fortunato was not happy. Has anyone seen Charlie? She asked. No one had. Charlie Bright, the recording secretary of the Woodland Park Improvement Association, had not missed a meeting in 10 years. Tonight might be the exception. The association met on the second Tuesday of every month in the media center at the Roosevelt Elementary School in Ferndale, a city that lay beyond 8 Mile Road north of Detroit. Like many neighborhood associations, it had a small number of officers, a president, a vice president, and treasurer, in addition to the secretary, and a dedicated core of a dozen or so residents who attended every meeting. Typically, the president would call the meeting to order shortly after 7. They would work through their agenda, and the evening would end with chatting, good-natured ribbing, and the newest gossip over plates of cookies and cups of coffee from the local Bigsby Coffee. Often they invited a guest to speak about issues of interest to the city's residents. Tonight's guest was the police chief of Ferndale, Nick Russo. The topic was local crime statistics. Ferndale was exceptionally safe, especially considering its proximity to the larger metropolis of Detroit. So Russo saw his primary task tonight as calming nerves and assuring the residents that things were under control. A big, muscular man, he made an impressive sight in his blue full-dress uniform, complete with cap under his arm as he stood talking with attendees. He seemed unruffled and relaxed. Not so Brittany, the association vice president. The more people who said they didn't know Charlie Bright's whereabouts, the more agitated Brittany became. Brittany, the association president, said at last, "What's going on?" The president's name was Elspeth Cunningham, and she tried but failed to keep the disapproval out of her voice. Brittany was a troublemaker while trying to appear reasonable and friendly. What's her problem now? Elspeth wondered. Charlie isn't here yet, Brittany said. We can't start without him. Elspeth shot a look at the clock on the wall. 7:15. It's odd, she agreed. He's never late. Right? Brittany said. I talked to him this morning. He said he'd see me here. And we have to get started. I promised the chief we'd be done by 9. I'm yours as long as you need me, Russo said. But we can't start without Charlie, Brittany said again. Who's going to take the minutes? I will, said a man seated at one of the kid-sized library tables, eager for the meeting to begin so he could get home in time to watch Rachel Maddow. The association officers looked at each other and shrugged. Okay, Elspeth said, let's get started. She called the meeting to order. I'll stop there. There's a natural break in the text. What happens from there is that everybody says, "Where's Charlie?" No, Charlie never shows up. Everybody says, "Where's Charlie?" The police chief finally says, "I'm going to send somebody to Charlie's house to check on things," and then we're off to the races in the book. So that's how In the House of Night starts. We've got a couple of minutes. I'll read a little bit of the first chapter of Savage City. It starts on Friday, March 4th, 1932. And the first chapter concerns Clarence Brown, who we talked about. The tip was on the level. The snitch said Andre saw McKinney's Cotton Pickers at a midnight show at the Greystone Ballroom. Now he wants a copy of their new recording. Sure enough, there goes Andre into Joe's record store. Andre Young, thief, steals codeine-laced cough syrup from drugstores and resells it to hopheads who want a break from the pain of living, of which there's way too much in Detroit in 1932. Watching from across St. Antoine Street, Clarence is sure it's him, even in the dim light at 4 o'clock. Andre has a little boy with him, small and dark-skinned like the older man. Andre's son, maybe. The boy stops in the doorway to Joe's and looks right at Clarence before he gets pulled by the arm inside. Clarence crosses the street, stops in front of the store. Whitewashed scrawls on the windows hawk the week's new recordings. Bessie Smith, Duke Ellington, Ethel Waters, Fats Waller. A flyer in the window touts a talk given by Wallace Fard. Are you a prisoner of the white man's Bible? Sponsored by the Nation of Islam, an organization Fard made up. Clarence peers into the store. He knows it well. Buys all his phonograph records here. He's known the proprietor, Joe, for years. Dwarfed by bins crammed with records, the little boy still looking at Clarence through the store's glass door. Large and grim, Clarence returns the boy's look with a scowl. The kid turns away. Detective Clarence Brown of the Detroit Police Department opens his wool overcoat, shifts the metal plates he wears under his suit coat, adjusts his 2 pearl-handled Colt 45 pistols in holsters at his waist. The bell over the front door tinkles. Clarence steps into the heavy cottony smell of steam heat. We're running out of time, so I think I'll stop it there. But that's how this book opens.
Thank you for that. Who are your favorite authors? Who do you read? I know I write thrillers, so I read a lot of thrillers.
I read a lot of different things. One of my favorite authors is Jane Austen, which always surprises people. And I like Henning Mankell. I like Ian Rankin, who created Rebus, the Scottish detective. I like James Ellroy, who was really a main inspiration for Savage City, who wrote L.A. Confidential, as I mentioned. Those are really the people that I most read. But I'm open to reading anything. You know, I really will. I don't just read mysteries or detective stories. I really read pretty far-rangingly.
I read far-rangingly too, and my book club keeps me reading far-rangingly as well.
Good.
And that's, I mean, I was a reader. I would go to the library walk to the library, carry as many books as I could fit between my fingertips and my chin,
Mhm.
read them before the 3 weeks were up, and headed back to the library. So
Yep.
your advice on if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader is absolutely true.
Yep. What would we do without libraries?
Really. And I finished the children's section before I was 13, and they wouldn't let me borrow anything from the adult section. And only 2 years ago, someone said to me, "Why didn't you ask your mother to go borrow a book?" I'm like, "Well, you tell me."
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's been a great hour visiting with you and learning about how you write, what you write, and Savage City. In the House of the Night, they're both available through the Jewish Book Fair bookstore. And
also, if I might just tell you my website, people can go
please,
and find out more about the Martin Preuss series and more about Savage City. It's www.donaldlevin.com. Very easy to remember.
okay, I don't see how I can put it in the chat, but it's very easy. It's just www.yourname.com.
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Donald and Karen, for being with us and for such a wonderful discussion. Donald, your journey to becoming an author was so interesting. And thank you to all of you at home for joining us. Our next event is In the Midst of Civilized Europe with Jeffrey Weidlinger on Wednesday, January 12th at 7 p.m. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair for our full schedule and ways to get involved. See you next time.